everyone, and welcome to another episode of Healthy Living Resources. I'm Amy Meehan, the Healthy People Program Specialist with Family and Consumer Sciences with OSU Extension. And today we have a really special episode with a roundtable of educators from all across the state joining us to talk about motherhood and mental health. So thank you all for joining us. We have Jenny Lobb, Bridget Britton, Erin Ruggiero, and Katie Schlagheck. So I will turn it over to Jenny to moderate. And again, thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Amy. So my name is Jenny Lobb, and I am a family and consumer science educator for OSU Extension in Franklin County. And last I was on the show in November 2019 to talk about the concept of work-family justice. And as a recap, that is essentially the idea that all individuals have equal opportunity to participate in both work and family life. And the absence of work-family justice, as you might imagine, is a significant source of stress for many new parents. So today, I want to build on that in a way, but just talk more generally about motherhood and mental health. And I am excited to be joined by three of my colleagues. We are all family and consumer science educators for OSU Extension, and we all have young children under the age of 2. So you'll get to hear a little bit about our experiences as new mothers and some of the different stress that we experienced as our newborns had health challenges of varying degree. Before I get into my story, I just want to give a little bit more background information. I want to share a little bit about postpartum depression. I was not aware of just how common postpartum depression is before last year, actually last Mother's Day. My son was about 3 months old. And there was a social media campaign called My Wish for Moms that you may or may not be familiar with. And it was a campaign that was launched to bring awareness to postpartum depression and anxiety. And I didn't realize up until that time that it affects about 1 in 7 women each year. It's more common than breast cancer, but we just don't really talk about it a whole lot. And I think maybe one of the reasons for that is that our culture views having a child as an exciting, happy event. And it is. But along with that, there's significant stress that new parents face. Whether you're diagnosed with a formal mental health disorder like anxiety or depression or not, there's significant stress that we all face as new parents. There are many factors that play into that, changes to sleep patterns and hormones and changes to work and social relationships. And that can just be incredibly stressful and challenging during such a vulnerable period in one's life. And so we're each going to share today some of our own experiences, some of the stress that we faced during that time when we had newborns. And some of the things that we learned or used as coping mechanisms. Personally, my son was relatively healthy, but he did have a tongue tie. If you're not familiar with that condition, it basically means that the skin that's under your tongue is tethered to the bottom of your mouth, so your tongue doesn't have full mobility, and it impacted his ability to eat and to nurse. And I wasn't diagnosed until he was about 6 weeks old. So what that meant for me was that my son was nursing constantly and not actually getting enough food. He wasn't getting enough nutrition. And I didn't know any differently, being a first-time mom. I didn't know that he was hungry and not getting enough milk. And so that was a stressful time for me, not having much time to myself, just trying to take care of him around the clock. Things really changed for us once he was diagnosed, and that was corrected. We kind of settled into a groove. But what I learned and what I would share with new moms, whatever your situation may be during that newborn period, is to take time for self-care and to redefine what self-care means to you. So we often think of self-care as, having these grand, luxurious experiences like going to the spa or taking a nice bubble bath. And sometimes self-care is just taking time to eat a nutritious meal, even if it's one that you pull from the freezer or that someone drops off at your doorstep. Asking for help and accepting help when you need it. And sometimes it can be saying no to things and setting your own priorities. Something that was frustrating to me as a new mom was when people would tell me again and again, like, oh, make sure you're taking care of yourself. Like, yes, I know I need to take care of myself. I'm a health educator. I just don't know how to do it. And so learning perhaps to say no and prioritize can be freeing. You get a lot of conflicting advice as a new parent. In my situation, as a breastfeeding mom, I was told, like, make sure you're getting enough sleep, but also feed the baby every couple of hours. You can't do both. So you have to, use your just judgment and figure out what your own personal priorities are. And just learn how to take care of yourself during that vulnerable time, asking for and accepting help when you need it. So that's my lesson learned that I would like to share today. I'm going to pass the mic now to my colleague, Katie, who works in Ottawa and Sandusky counties as the Family and Consumer Science Educator for OSU Extension up there.
Well, thanks, Jenny. So a little bit of background with us. My daughter is now 8 months old. At 3 days old, she was admitted to the hospital for a concern that she might have RSV, HSV, the herpes simplex virus, meaning for us, the common virus with cold sores. So being a first-time mom, I didn't know much, but I did know that HSV is really bad for infants. So we were sent from our pediatrician's office to be directly admitted to the children's hospital. When we were there, they had to do what they call a rule-out sepsis, which includes an array of tests, blood work, spinal tap, which they tried 8 times and were unsuccessful at actually getting spinal fluid. So after that, we said, enough tests. We were in the hospital for 4 days waiting for test results to come in. And the head of pediatric infectious disease was back from vacation and met with us and told us that we had to stay in the hospital for 21 days as a precaution. So that number of days had been thrown around. Many of the doctors, though, told us that if certain test results came back negative, we could leave, or they didn't think it was HSV, they thought it was something else, so we might be able to leave early, but that was never the case. As soon as we walked in the door, we were going to be there for 21 days. So there was a lot to process during this time. My husband and I went through every stage of grief, denial, a lot of anger, depression, a lot of bargaining, and acceptance. And we went through these over and over again, finally landing on acceptance. So knowing we were going to be there for 21 days, my husband and I made a calendar, and we reached out to people for help. So we knew that I needed time to get out of the hospital for my own mental health. So we reached out to people who would come during the day so that I could go out to appointments, go to the store, go home, go eat dinner with my husband. My parents were visiting from Washington State, so they came and stayed and took their turn at the hospital. My mom stayed 2 nights with the baby so that I could go home and try to get some good sleep. People brought us dinner and gave us gift cards to go get food. So it was a really good pull of support from our network of our family and friends. So during this time, I was really private about what was going on. Usually I would have posted something on social media, but I didn't want a lot of questions, especially because I didn't have a lot of answers. It was really hard for me to process what was going on in such a stressful situation, and I didn't want to relive the situation over and over again with everybody that I knew. So like Jenny talked about breastfeeding, I was also trying to breastfeed during this, and I felt like the odds were against me. So here I was in a very stressful situation, having healthcare providers telling me not to stress because it would impact my supply. And trying to breastfeed when doctors, residents, nurses, assistants constantly coming in and out of the room is nearly impossible. So I pumped and got very, very little. And it took a toll on me physically, emotionally, and mentally. So I was producing so little that I had to supplement with formula because she stopped gaining weight. But interesting enough, from the CDC found that 60% of mothers do not breastfeed as long as they intend for the same reasons that I struggled with myself. Issues with lactation, concern over baby's weight, and hospital practices. So I'm sure people have heard the term mom guilt. So this is really where it started with me. I felt like a failure for myself and for my child because I knew that breastfeeding was the best, but not being able to do that and trying to accept that was really hard, and I felt very guilty about that. What really helped for me was hearing from a lot of other people about their experiences. One of the pediatric doctors in the hospital during our 21-day stay told me about his wife and her struggles to breastfeed any of their 3 children. He told me it always felt like the ones that want to breastfeed the most have the most struggle. And then I would talk to family and friends about the guilt that I was feeling, and I heard a lot of stories similar where people wanted to breastfeed and were not able to, and kind of their acceptance, and then kind of the sense of relief they got once they accepted that. And really, even our own pediatrician talked about one of his kids was able to be breastfed, one was not, and you really can't tell the difference. So hearing all these stories kind of gave me some reassurance and kind of lessened that stigma a little bit. But part of me will always have that mom guilt. But looking back, it was always the best decision that I could make for us. And now, happy, thriving 8-month-old, so it's great. So now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Erin Ruggiero to learn a bit about her experience.
Thank you, Katie. So my name is Erin Ruggiero, and I am the Family and Consumer Science Educator in Medina County with OSU Extension. And I'm a mom to an amazing 21-month-old boy, William. And our birth story is very long, so I try to keep it as short as possible. It gets complicated. But the main thing was that my pregnancy was very easy up until about 27 weeks. And it was around this time that my blood pressure started going up, and they had told me I had gestational hypertension. And all that means is high blood pressure in pregnancy. So of course, every mom's first thought is, well, what did I do wrong? How did this happen? What could I have done differently to not get this? But the reality is that this can just happen. So for the next couple weeks, I was having pretty severe pains, and they had brought me to the hospital and back to my doctor, and they had said, well, you're a first-time mom. It's probably just some aches and pains, or the baby's pushing up against a rib, or something like that. And then the last thing that my doctor said to me was, well, maybe you should get a massage or something. So it was the next night that we ended up back in the hospital. And this time my blood pressure was reading 200 over 100. And the nurses took it over and over because they wanted to make sure that that was right. And then they told me that I had preeclampsia. And that's a pregnancy complication characterized by high blood pressure. And then it usually affects another organ system like the liver or the kidneys. And then they also told me that I had HELLP syndrome, which is a life-threatening pregnancy complication, usually considered to be a variant of preeclampsia. So of course, started off with the blood pressure, then it turned into something else, and then something very severe, and it hit us all at once. So we were faced with the reality that at just 32 weeks, we were not gonna leave the hospital until we had a baby. So a few days later, I had an emergency C-section, and my son was born weighing just 3 pounds, 6 ounces. And we got to look at him for a moment before they rushed into the NICU, which stands for Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. He required breathing support at birth, as well as a feeding tube, and he was inside what they call an isolette, which is something that can keep him warm since he was too little to regulate his own body temperature. So the next 28 days were spent driving back and forth to the NICU to try to hold him, help him learn how to take a bottle, and hope that he gained weight, because he couldn't come home unless he was, a lot of them say at least 4 pounds. It depends on where you're at the hospital. But the NICU life can bring many ups and downs, and there's a lot of things that they accomplish, and then there can be a lot of setbacks. So just when you think you're going to get to go home, they say, actually, he's not taking enough from his bottle, and it's going to be a couple more days, and it's a lot mentally. But he received great care there, and we were ecstatic when we got to bring him home 28 days after he was born. But because of the time in the NICU, we only had a few weeks with him before I had to go back to work. So when he started daycare, I found myself worrying more than I thought a typical mom would. And it's hard to say a typical mom because everybody's so different, but I thought this can't be normal how much I'm thinking about him. And obviously every mom thinks about their baby, but just worrying constantly. And if I called to check on him and he hadn't napped well, or I could hear him crying in the background, that was all I could think about the rest of the day. I could not focus on my work. And it was just, my mind was just racing, and I could not ease my mind when I needed to. So thankfully, as Jenny mentioned, postpartum depression is getting a little bit more press now, and moms are more aware of how to recognize the symptoms. But I was unaware of postpartum anxiety being its own thing. So when I was going through this, I looked up the symptoms of postpartum depression, and I didn't feel that those fit for me. I didn't feel sad. I just felt constant worry. And after talking with other moms about how I felt, I mentioned it to my doctor, and I learned that the symptoms of postpartum anxiety are constant worry, feeling that something bad's going to happen, racing thoughts, and you can have some physical symptoms too. But knowing that my constant worry wasn't just from being a first-time mom, and that it wasn't something I could help, made me feel better. And I also felt like because I had this background in education in child development and my experience working with children, that I should be able to just handle it. And I know exactly what kids need because I studied it. But when it's so different when it's your own. And once I reached out for help, things started to get a lot better. And the best advice that I can give to any parent dealing with stress or guilt is to lean on others, reach out for help if you need it, and don't try to be the perfect parent. Just being there for your baby when they need you and taking care of your own needs as much as you can are all you need to do when you bring the baby home. I would now like to turn it over to my colleague, Bridget Britton, to share her experience as a new mom.
Thanks, Erin. I just want to share right off the bat that I also do have a very long, complicated birth story with my son. And when Erin was sharing about the NICU, my heart actually started to race and getting my own anxiety up. When our son, Jackson, was 25 weeks gestation, we found out that he had a congenital heart defect. I won't go into all of the checkups and ultrasounds that we had to go to, but we were anticipating a week NICU stay prior or after his birth, and then prior to open heart surgery at about 3 to 6 months old. But when he was 2 days old, they had to do a life-saving intervention that led us to be in the NICU much longer than expected. Since his time in the NICU to his open heart to some complications that we've experienced since, and just getting ill with things like the common cold, we spent over 80 days in the hospital. So it's been a very difficult journey for us, for my whole family. So a few things that came from my experience is that I had to realize very early on that any type of birth plan was out the window for me, right? I wanted my baby born safe and healthy. One of the things that, that can be very important to parents. That's one of the things, so that I joke is just get the baby out, right? Safe and healthy. So that's very important to me. But also once he was born, I, like Katie, had trouble because I had to exclusively pump. And I had to also accept very early on that my breastfeeding journey and my exclusively pumping journey wasn't going to look the same as it does for many other moms. And it's something that I still grieve. One of the things that helped me with that, though, is that there's companies out there that you can, some people find this gross and you can take it with a grain of salt, but you can send your milk to companies and they'll put it in like a ring or a necklace or things like that. I found that to be something that was very helpful for me. But our son is exclusively tube fed. So he has something that is inside of his stomach that all of his food goes into at this time. So we're working on feeding But as a mom, I think it's important to realize that it's okay to grieve those kind of things. So I grieve things like not being able to bottle feed, right? Not being able to even formula feed through a bottle. So I think that that's important for us as moms to recognize that there are things that we can be sad about. One of the things that's been really helpful to me has been to find a tribe of mothers, and though these ladies here in this, we live around the state, but I know that I can text any one of them or message any one of them and just kind of get the support from them. Being a special needs mom, I've also found support in some Facebook groups and things of that nature that have been really just helpful. Our hospital has a support group that I found really helpful, and just receiving therapy. I also tend to be a very independent and prideful person. And so before my son was born, even though we knew he had a congenital heart defect, I was like, I don't need any help. I can raise him on my own. Everybody stay out. And now I'm so thankful. Like Katie said, we had people come to the hospital all the time and help and just be there and sit with me while I sat there all day. And I really had to accept and swallow my pride and say, you know what, I need help. And we still have people come. My mom was coming up once a week just to help with doing laundry, and he's 18 months old now. So everybody helps in their own unique way with our situation, and just ask for the help, whatever that looks like for you. Some of your friends and family may be able to help watch the kids, watch your child, but some may be able to only help like doing the laundry, or washing the dishes, and all that has been super helpful to us. The one last thing that I wanted to share for the special needs moms out there is that PTSD is a real thing for us. I can barely step foot inside the hospital now. After my son's open heart, at 3.5 months old, I realized that I couldn't be alone in the hospital with him. Up until that point, I had stayed every single night in the hospital with him. But then it just happened that I couldn't do it anymore. Then when we spent more nights in the hospital, I couldn't do it. So that's really where my husband and the rest of our support stayed with him every single night. And I also struggled with the mom guilt, but that's where your tribe comes in. That's where your friends and your family come in and say, no, you take care of you, and whatever that looks like. And if you need to stay somewhere else at the Ronald McDonald House or hotel at your house, then you do that to take care of yourself mentally. My son has a lot of doctor's appointments, follow-up appointments. And so I bring somebody with me. I bring my mom a lot with me, my in-laws, a friend, whoever can go with me, just to have a support when I go into the hospital, because it's a real thing for me. It's a real struggle to go. So that's one of the support strategies that I use as a coping with my anxiety. I was a pretty anxious person prior to having my son, so everything kind of just compounded on top of itself after he's been born. But I want you all to know that there is hope, that there are things out there to help all of us. And I think, we all have different things that'll work for us, and to just reach out and find what works for us. It's important.
Thanks, Bridget. And I want to thank all three of these ladies for their vulnerability and courage and sharing their experiences on this telecast today. And what I hope that you heard listening to each of us share our stories is that motherhood is stressful, parenting is stressful, and it's okay to take time to take care of ourselves. We often feel guilty about doing that, but we shouldn't, because self-care is necessary. We need to take care of ourselves in order to take care of our families. The other thing that I hope you heard in each of our stories is this common thread of asking for help and accepting help. So if you are a parent, don't be afraid to ask for and accept help. And if you're someone who's listening and wondering how you can support Parents, especially when they are in this newborn phase, when things may be especially stressful, might be to offer help. And you can do that in a tangible way, like, offering to give mom a break for a little bit, or doing laundry or dishes, making a meal, or sometimes just listening, just reaching out and asking, how are you doing? And being willing to actually listen, and not necessarily have an answer, but just listen and validate what that mom is feeling at that time can be incredibly helpful. And then the final thing that I'll leave you with is just knowing to know that postpartum depression and anxiety are real, and look out for the signs and symptoms of that, either for yourself or for new moms that you know, and encourage people to seek help if and when they need it. So that's really going to be best for both them and their families. So with that, that will wrap up our Healthy Living Resources telecast for the month on motherhood and mental health. So thank you all for tuning in today.